Welcome to my show. I'm a guest here. Her name is Jessica Milner. Mrs. Jessica, how are you doing, ma?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Mrs. Jess. Firstly, you are a master nutritionist. You are also a specialist and a quantum energy healer. Can you please, Mrs. Jess, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Mrs. Jess?
Sure. I am a master nutritionist. I practiced for years as a nutrition response testing practitioner in New Jersey. I'm also certified in emotion code and body code, and I have my own quantum frequency blueprint I put out now that combines those. So that's my quantum energy healer. And I am certified in functional blood work analysis. When I moved from New Jersey to Idaho, I decided to go virtual. So that's what I'm doing now. And uh, I combine spiritual and physical wellness. I help mostly women in their late 30s to 60 who are going through peri and menopause, really harness control back of their life.
Going to that point of physical wellness, from this experience you have, Mrs. Jessica, have you written any book or are you planning to write any book in the coming future, Mrs. Jess?
Yes, actually, I am working on a solo book this year. So that should be coming out sometime later this year if all goes well, and it'll be called Spiritual Nutrition. I am planning to do that.
Thank you so much. We'll be expecting that definitely, Mrs. Jess. Firstly, I would like to dive to the point of the thyroid symptom, Mrs. Jess. There are some times when someone is getting to the point of getting to probably testing when it comes to thyroid symptom, and they could get to a point whereby their result seems normal, but probably they have those symptoms in them. So why do you feel like so many people normally experience these thyroid symptoms even when their lab results are normal, Mrs. Jess?
One of the important things to understand about when a conventional medical doctor is looking at the testing, they're looking to be able to diagnose. And if you are not in, so bad that you are diagnosable, then they're going to tell you everything looks normal, but you're still experiencing all of these symptoms because the symptoms will begin before you're diagnosable. So when you look at it from a more functional perspective, you can take a look at where there are gaps in nutrition and other things in the body so that you never become diagnosable. That would be the goal.
That is very, very impactful because, they usually just have that brief. They do not tell you probably if it's like a mild something, they will normally tell you that it is the thyroid situation that that person is normally passing through. Thank you so much for that insight, Mrs. Jessica. And I would like to also dive to the point of difference when it comes to thyroid issues and other health conditions. There are a lot of health conditions. So how do you think someone can tell? Like, do you think someone can seriously tell between the difference between thyroid issue and other health conditions with similar symptoms? And what do you feel like is the subclinical? I would just want to join to subclinical hyperthyroidism, and how do you think it can also impact someone's health in those areas, Mrs. Jess?
Okay, so a lot of the time it would get overlooked as thyroid symptom by just describing symptoms, because you have some of the things like fatigue, weight gain, constipation, even just like depression and anxiety. These things can be chalked up to other issues, not necessarily thyroid. When you start to get into having like extra bits of anxiety, and you're sweating all the time, like you can't control your temperature. If you're sweating all the time, then there could be something overactive with your thyroid for hyper. If it's underactive or hypothyroid, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble keeping your temperature. You're going to feel cold all of the time. Maybe have dry hair and skin and things like that. In terms of there's a lot of overlaps, but in terms of a subclinical hypothyroidism, so that's typically when like your TSH is high, but like the T4 is more normal. So the symptoms may be there, they may not be super noticeable, but it can actually mess with a lot of the things. And this is one of those times when because maybe some of those more severe things, like, like maybe you don't feel cold all the time yet, you're not experiencing every single thing that you would check off the list. So your doctor is going, okay, well, maybe you're dealing with anxiety or depression. Maybe it's ADHD, so you often get misdiagnosed, or they just kind of say, oh, well, why don't you just lose some weight and, see a therapist or something like that. So it gets overlooked like that.
That is very, very inspiring. Honestly speaking, that means that it could probably even get overlooked, if the circum issues are not definitely in place. Thank you so much for that insight, Mrs. Jessica. And I would also like to dive to the point of diet and nutrition. We do know that there are a lot of diets, nutritions that definitely help in different issues. But when it comes to this point of thyroid area, how do you think diet and nutrition usually supports thyroid naturally, Mrs. Jess?
So one of the cool things about the thyroid is when I was learning about this is from a functional and holistic perspective, we want to help the thyroid without actually like going right at the thyroid to help it, if that makes sense. So one of the ways we would do that is with diet and nutrition. So following an anti-inflammatory protocol diet is going to be helpful, really just because your gut and your liver are playing a huge role in this. It's a constant cycle. So we want to make sure that the gut is able to do everything. You want to be able to convert your free T4 into T3 so that that can speak to all the rest of the cells in the body. And if your gut is not in a good shape, it's not going to be able to do that. But also, if your gut's not in good shape, that is where we produce serotonin and dopamine, which then go back up and feed your hypothalamus, which then goes and feeds the pituitary and then the TSH. So it's this whole big thing. So you're going to have more feelings of depression, of anxiety, of brain fog, of memory loss, and then have your gut issues as well. And then, if the gut and the liver are not doing well, then your metabolism is not going to be as well. So it's a whole cycle. So a lot of people do find that at least cutting out gluten and wheat is a good choice. Most of the time, we're having them for about at least 30, but about 90 days, cutting out, the grains, the refined sugars, dairy, eggs, things that are inflammatory. And then bringing those back in one at a time and really noticing how you feel after you bring back in eggs for a couple of days. How did you sleep? How does your skin feel? Is there a weird taste in your mouth? And really take notice of how your body is feeling so you can figure out what it is that your body can tolerate well and what you still need to avoid for at least a certain amount of time while we get everything back on track with your hormones.
Wow, that means one definitely needs to understand the body. If one can
Yes.
definitely understand the body, then definitely everything flows. When I eat probably rice or this, then I can know how my body reacts. Then I can know how I can shift with it. Understanding the body will definitely work. Thank you so much for that insight, Mrs. Jess. I would like to dive to the point of environmental factors and also toxins, Mrs. Jess. I don't know, you said, sweating, a lot of sweating could happen, stuff like that. But I would like to also know like to know if there you think there are any toxins or also environmental factors that can impact it. I know you said sweating, cold, all stuff, but do you think there are also other things that you think factors environmentally that you think can also impact thyroid health, Mrs. Jess?
Yeah. So, there's some ones that you would hear multiple people say, like smoking and, excessive alcohol and things like that. But of course, there's some other issues with things like radiation. Depending upon where you live, you might be exposed to more of that. And then things like fragrances and artificial fragrances and other ingredients that are in lotions and sunscreens and like the Glade plugins and stuff like that. Those are endocrine disruptors, which means they're going to make your hormones not behave. So that can lead to other issues. Also things like, pesticides, BPAs and plastics and things like that. We want to avoid having microplastics in our brain, of course. Um, But yeah, because it's going to mess with that hormone synthesis there. And oftentimes we'll start to go, okay, well, I think it's my thyroid, but most of the time we're blaming the thyroid for something that's going on elsewhere in the endocrine system because those are all connected in how they're communicating. So mostly for me, I noticed that when we paid more attention to the adrenals, the thyroid would start to behave itself better as well. And always removing some of these things. And, sometimes it's a bit of lifestyle. People don't realize that the gain scent beads that they're using to make their laundry smell fantastic is contributing to their health issues. And on top of that, it's also masking any mold and other things that could be in the clothing in the house, that if you smelled the mold, you would make sure that you would remove that, but you've covered it up. And so then, it just layers on there. And then that can really lead to a lot of issues as well. When I first started my holistic journey, I was quite overweight, and I didn't have anything diagnosable, but I had some things going on with hormones, and removing things like that from my life was really, really helpful in just in making everything behave itself better so that I feel alive again.
Honestly speaking, I completely agree with you because it even remind me of a time that I don't even look at things like that. And sometimes, even it's my dad that used to do it, he would just come and say, Timmy, these things, your pillow stuff like that, but I don't take it serious, and those things probably could impact health in a very long way. So when I said, okay, maybe I should just try my best to give this change, and it definitely really impacted in a very huge way. It's a very, very big insight, honestly speaking. Thank you so much for that insight, Mrs. Jess.
Mhm.
I also like to dive to the point of the area of brain fog and fatigue. I do not know, I don't know. So I do not know if it definitely impacts brain fog and fatigue. Do you think um, thyroid issues impact brain fog and fatigue, Mrs. Jess?
Yeah, yes. Mainly because when your thyroid markers are off, then it's indicating that there's levels of stress on the pituitary, there's levels of stress on the gut and on the liver. And I mentioned before that we produce those happy chemicals, those the serotonin and dopamine for our brain in the gut. And so when these things are going on and we're not able to convert all of these things, then it's not feeding back up into the hypothalamus. So it's like this vicious cycle of brain fog and everything, and then the gut. So what you mean, you just like from head to toe are feeling not like yourself. And yeah, it's mostly those happy chemicals. We're just not able to move them up. We have leaky gut. Things are getting in and out of the gut that should not be. We've got proteins floating around in places that they shouldn't be, toxins going all over. And then if we are able to produce any of that serotonin and dopamine, it may not be getting through properly. And more than that, we're probably not able to fully absorb our minerals in our diet or otherwise, which are going to help to transport those up to the brain.
That is
So yeah, sometimes people are like, why do I have to work on my gut when it's a thyroid issue? This is why.
completely agree. Honestly speaking, that is very, very impactful because one of the big thing is brain fog. And as you said, there are some things in the body that will not function the way it should function. So when the food is in, instead of bringing out this instrument that's are needed for this area to work well, it won't do that. So it's definitely impact in a very wrong way. And brain fog is a very, very big thing that it definitely impacts someone's health many ways, honestly speaking. So thank you so much for that insight, Mrs. Jess. And lastly, Mrs. Jess, I would like to dive to the point of misconception. I do not know. Probably there might be any misconception when it comes to thyroid health. If there is any, what do you think or what do you feel are the biggest misconception about thyroid health that you feel like people need to know, Mrs. Jess?
Well, I would say it probably that most people think that it pretty much only affects women. And although it affects more women than men, it does affect men as well. And it doesn't only affect older people. Typically, as we age, our symptoms amp up, things start to get a bit worse. So that might be when diagnoses are happening. But you can have these issues at a very young age. As an example, my daughter, who is now 12, when she was about 6, we did find that her thyroid, just through nutrition response testing, her thyroid was underactive, which made sense. She was doing the things like she was always cold. She was bringing like a fleece blanket to the dinner table with her. She was chilly. She had a lot of anxiety. And as a 6-year old, you're kind of like, why is she feeling this way? So, we knew that there were things going on with her thyroid, even at that young age. And, just through nutrition, nutritional supplements, we were able to get her back to, and also through emotion code, which is part of what I offer. We were able to get her back up so that she's not experiencing those things anymore. I think that's probably one of the biggest things there. And I mean, but also people kind of think that it would be easy to diagnose, but it's typically not very easy to diagnose because, like we talked about, the symptoms are subtle, they get confused with other things. And, especially when you ask a doctor to run your thyroid panel, a lot of the time they'll only run a TSH. That thyroid stimulating hormone, and that is actually produced in the pituitary. It's not even a true thyroid hormone. But even just that, their range is zero point 0.5 to 5.5, which is basically like trying to choose your favorite restaurant between New York City and LA. It's a huge area there. So when you bring it down in closer, which is how I would look at it, then you can go, okay, I think there's something to be said here, and we should keep an eye on this sooner. But I think people are like, oh, it's easy to diagnose, but it's just not.
Thank you so much for that insight. That shows that checking on thyroid is very, very important. It's one of the most important instruments in the health that we also need to definitely check on, because I think it definitely impacts many things in the health, which is very, very, very important. Probably even I know my country we are like that, but probably probably most people just have some kind of conclusion. It could be this, it could be that, but it could be things like this which could be having constant to just be coming back, and these are the things that could be causing heat. So thank you so much for this big insight, Mrs. Jess. Lastly, Mrs. Jess, there's a question I normally ask during the end of the show, Mrs. Jess. From the forefathers, there are a lot of things that do exist, beautiful things that do exist during our forefathers' time that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Jess, what do you think that thing would be, Mrs. Jess?
I mean, I don't know, maybe bringing back more trust in natural remedies like herbal and even homeopathy. I would like to see more respect in those areas. Not to say that conventional doesn't have a place, because it does, and we're very glad that we have that. But the other thing I would say is during that time, with our forefathers and people were living more in rhythm with nature, more in tune with their circadian rhythms. We were sleeping when it was dark. We were up with the sun. It didn't matter necessarily what time it was. It was just time because of where the sun was, and you were getting all of those good things from being outside. And because of all of our technological advances and everything, we've become rather out of touch with nature. That we've made things easier for ourselves, but harder on our bodies. So it would be nice to see those kinds of things come back.
Yeah, the body has really, really been impacted largely with the impact of technology. But we just have to hope more things comes, because during that time, there's nature. Nature is powerful. We have communication with one another. We have feelings. We have touching. But many of it now is really, really reduced. This time, a lot of things now is just online and stuff like that, which really, really is it's mean a lot. And also respects and what you said are also things that we definitely need to see come back. A lot of things like that are definitely declining every single day. We see things that no respect and stuff like that. So definitely, it could definitely come back. I want to also sincerely thank you, Mrs. Jess, for the opportunity and the time you've given to me and the audience. Thank you so much, Mrs. Jess.
Thanks for having me.
All right, have a wonderful day, Mrs. Jess. Bye bye.
Bye.